Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Kakashi tapped his chopsticks thoughtfully against the table. The situation is delicate because Tanagakure is a mostly neutral country between two shinobi villages. We can't just go in there and start fighting a multitude of ninja who don't represent the country as a whole. Even discreetly, the battle ensued would potentially cause too much damage. Gaara's presence alone in Tanagakure for a few days caused some strain. Needing this fight to happen elsewhere is imperative. Naruto's face had scrunched up the longer that Kakashi spoke, and the blonde knucklehead let out a thoughtful, as he nodded his head like he had actually understood any of that. Sasuke wanted to roll his eyes and sigh. The shade refuses to speak. Kakashi continued his remarks. We need intel, or we will be going into this blind. The Cage has that intel and is in the works of acquiring more information. Trusting Gaara is our best option. Sasuke wanted to say more, to argue, to persuade if only it weren't so unlike him to do so. The Sasuke everyone was expecting was the uncaring one. The one who couldn't be too bothered with any of this at all because it didn't directly involve the Uchiha or his mission to investigate the Otsutsuki. And part of Sasuke told himself to get a grip and to rein in the worry and trust the others. Sasuke knew he was being unreasonable, knew that he needed to focus on his own mission and goals. That's what Sakura wanted, too. But Sasuke didn't know how to wash his hands clean of this anymore, to eradicate the presence of Sakura in his mind, the feel of her skin, the embraces, smiles, and promises between them. Sasuke didn't want to, and therein lied his problem. Kakashi was giving him that knowing sidelong look that had Sasuke glaring back at him. First things first, then, the sixth Hokage stated as he made to stand. Let's go find Sakura and then we can meet up with Gaara this evening. And as Kakashi stood, the sensei suddenly realized that his former students no longer occupied the table but were making a break for the entrance, leaving Kakashi with a table full of Naruto's dishes and an expectant store owner smiling at him with the bill. Sasuke heard their sensei sigh, murmur something about how he was supposed to be saving for retirement, but then handing over a wad of change to the giddy and grateful older woman. When they located Sakura soon after in one of the medicine preparation rooms, she was bending over a mortar and pestle again, gloved hands moving deftly, and her hair pulled tightly behind her, and Sasuke realized for the first time how long it had grown since they had left Konoha. The time had seemed to have passed them so quickly, and yet more than a couple months had transpired since he had returned home that day at dawn back in the Leaf. Her attire had changed overnight, and Sasuke instantly noticed that she no longer wore any of the clothes he had bought for her but had taken the liberty of finding something more fitting her previous style, red, short-sleeved, and tantalizing short around the midriff. The very stomach he had ran his fingers across in the darkness of their shared room last night. Sasuke pointedly looked away from her exposed skin as they advanced upon her position, and he decided to hang back against the entrance as Naruto and Kakashi greeted her enthusiastically. He settled into a comfortably uninterested position in typical Uchiha fashion against the wall and peeked over when Sakura elbowed Naruto's arm when the blonde idiot shouted, "You're making more puke pills." Sasuke felt a weight settle in his stomach as he made the connection that she was handling the ingredients required to make him more food pills for his mission. And from the trays set out before her, Sakura was making a lot of them. Even Kakashi glanced back Sasuke's way as his former sensei realized Sakura's purpose, as well. Although somewhat touched by her effort, Sasuke feigned disinterest in the lot of them. "Let's have a taste," Naruto exclaimed. "Surely, they aren't as bad as they used to be." But before Naruto could touch one, Sakura pushed him away with her body. "Naruto, you need to stop that greedy habit of yours. They are made with ashua, a plant that many people have severe allergic reactions to." Sasuke smirked silently to himself as Sakura chastised their gluttonous friend, and Sasuke wanted to say something like, "Should have just let him eat it. That would teach him a lesson," but Sasuke remained silent as Naruto shrieked at Sakura's revelation. The idiot jerked his entire body away from the food pills, eyes turning into round circles as he pointed at them. Now your cooking can kill people. Naruto. Sakura seethed in that drawn-out warning of his name she often used while considering to pommel their friend, and they all knew if she weren't holding her gloved, Ashua-tainted hands up and away from everyone, Sakura would have hit him. They won't kill you unless you're allergic, Kakashi explained, motioning Naruto to take a few steps away. How did you learn it was a common allergen? He asked Sakura. Her anger instantly forgotten, Sakura turned red from embarrassment and her eyes darted to the Uchiha. After Mako told me about the plant, I tested it myself to assess the taste. I might have had a little reaction. Sasuke scoffed at the half-truth and spit out what she didn't want to say. It wasn't little. Mako didn't stop her from trying it, knowing how toxic it was. He was trying to kill her. Feeling merciful, Sasuke left out the part about Sakura's anaphylactic reaction, her face and mouth swelling up like a balloon that had left her bumbling through an explanation to a half-annoyed, half-concerned Sasuke. Naruto instantly reddened after learning of Mako's involvement. That guy. Kakashi didn't give Naruto's exclamation any attention, skipping over his statement immediately as he leaned curiously over the large array of food pills. But Sasuke isn't allergic, so these are the food pills you made for his mission. Are all of these for him, then? Yes, Sakura stated, and she proceeded to relay the properties of the food pills, their various side effects and so on. Apparently, she had made modifications to these. They had less of a physical toll on the body and a greater number could be taken in a single dosage. They all raised their brows and glanced at one another in silent admiration. Sasuke didn't bother to hide the small smirk of pride spreading across his face at his female companion's astounding ability to make advancement upon advancement on something she had only just created days ago. Where had she even found the time? It's not foolproof yet, Sakura disclaimed as she hoisted a large container of compacted food pills from the counter and took slow and careful steps to Sasuke. They both froze when her fingers bumped against his during the transfer. They also both instantly looked away from one another as the small physical contact brought memories of the more intimate touches of last night. The first physical anything other than kissing that had transpired between them had progressed so quickly, and now Sasuke was backpedaling, silently berating himself for the first time about his weak willpower. They had only ever exchanged a couple kisses, something that Sasuke thought would be manageable, safe, and just enough to take that edge off, satiate that desire that suddenly choked all his stoic sense out of him. And yet, things had heated so much last night that Sakura had felt compelled to mention it. Sasuke just hadn't expected the cravings something like running his fingers along her bare back would evoke in him. Her touching him was wonderful, but when he had touched her in return, his hands starting with her shirt and finding her skin underneath, it was erotic. And typical for Sasuke, he had balked, realizing the trajectory of their course. Because the truth was, they needed clear heads. Just as he had told her. And Sasuke's head had been anything but clear since Sakura had joined him on his mission. I still need you to test them, Sakura stated quietly, and Sasuke's attention snapped back to his pink-haired teammate, who was still avoiding his eyes shyly. I can make adjustments from there. Sasuke didn't know what to say or do other than nod silently as he withdrew a summoning scroll and performed the jutsu that would seal the food pills within it. Naruto could go with you, now. Go train and test one out and come back before nightfall so I can modify the recipe if I need to. Great idea, Naruto exclaimed, and he ran over to Sakura's workstation and plucked a loose pill off the counter, gulping it greedily before saying, "They still taste like mudballs, Sakura." You idiot, Sakura gasped, storming over to him and checking his face. You don't even know if you're allergic. I can't let Sasuke have an unfair advantage. Naruto announced with that stupid face-breaking grin. I'm fine. See, if Sasuke can handle the ass ingredient then so can I. All three of them rolled their eyes at Naruto's sense of competitiveness against his lifelong rival, Sasuke would never admit that neither of them still couldn't stand to be outdone by the other in any way, as he stomped out the door, yelling, "Come on, Sasuke. Time to kick your ass." Sakura sighed, turning once again to Sasuke. "If he has a reaction, teleport him back immediately." Sasuke nodded, then hesitated, glancing back between Sakura and Kakashi, whom had been leaning against the counter with an amused sort of expression. "What about the cage?" "Oh." Sakura smiled innocently as Kakashi briefly explained their intentions of visiting with her and the cage about the situation at hand. "He won't be finished until later this evening. That's when we are supposed to all meet up." Sasuke nodded, already being aware of this fact. When neither of his remaining members of Team 7 said anything more to detain him, Sasuke followed his blonde rival out the door, not being able to shake the suspicious feeling that he was purposefully being sent away. Sakura admired Kakashi for his perceptiveness because as her sensei leaned out the window to watch his 2 chakra pill-dosed disciples navigate through an intricate web of sand-constructed and adobe houses, he asked, "What are you planning?" Sakura's eyes widened when he found hers and she suddenly knew that she had been caught. Sakura sighed. "How did you guess?" Kakashi moved away from the window to lean against the counter beside her as she finished working, whipping out his favorite scandalous Ika Ika book. "Your behavior is off. At first, I thought it was because of the evolution of your relationship with Sasuke, but..." Sakura's eyes grew even wider as his words registered in her mind, and she blushed furiously as she defended, "I don't know what you're talking about." Kakashi raised his hands, saying, "I won't mention anything again. It's between the both of you." Sakura turned her back to him to hide her face, not believing him for a second. He would stick his nose where it didn't belong for the rest of their lives. Kakashi continued, "However, I've known the both of you for a long time and I just want to say that I am happy for you. It looks good on you both, being in love." Sakura stilled her panicked faux work movements at Kakashi's words and turned back to face him. Even with half his face concealed by the black mask, Sakura saw the upturn of his lips and the crease of a smile beneath his exposed right eye. She had never wanted to hug someone so tightly in her life because his words, his approval, meant so much to her. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes threatening to water, and Kakashi nodded. But the feeling of happiness eroded when Kakashi finished the rest of what he was trying to say before getting sidetracked. "Seeing all these food pills you've made in advance suggests to me that you're not planning on being here to make more of them. Am I wrong to assume this?" And Sakura sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose as she dropped her shoulders in silent defeat. "No," she admitted. "You're not wrong. I wanted to talk to you. As a leaf shinobi talks to their Hokage." Kakashi raised his eyebrow but waited for her to continue. And she confessed to him her feelings about Gaara's plans, Sasuke's valid suggestion for a single-person mission to infiltrate the organization, her own plans to deal with the situation, along with the details of Mako's information, and her carefully constructed counterplans. She told Kakashi everything she planned to do and exactly how she would do it. Kakashi listened with a grim face, simultaneously intrigued, and sighing at each step of Sakura's points of reasoning. When she finally finished, Kakashi stared down at his feet for a moment before lifting his eyes to her. "As your sensei, I want to say no. To put the responsibility on Gaara as he suggested. It's too dangerous to do this alone." Sakura nodded. She was aware of this, had prepared herself for this. "The boys won't hear of it," Kakashi pointed out, "they'll insist on joining you." "I don't plan on telling them," Sakura confessed. "I'll leave immediately. When they learn of it, I'll need you to convince them to stay behind. And persuade Gaara, too. Strategically, it is the safest route for everyone." Kakashi sighed. "I don't foresee this part of your plan going well. Even the cage won't be pleased that you've gone against the plan. He feels responsible. Do what you must. Play the Hokage card if you have to. Isn't that your favorite?" She smiled teasingly. Kakashi looked affronted at her statement and Sakura laughed good-naturedly despite the stressful topic. Do I have your official permission, then? She asked. As your Hokage, I say go. Bring them to the light or bring them down, whichever of the two options prevents them from threatening your life again. Are you sure that you're ready? I was ready the very moment they laid their hands on Isao. It's my turn to protect the ones I love, now. Sasuke scowled deeply at Naruto, who had just taken his third chakra pill before funneling Kurama's chakra into his limbs and body once again. Let's go again. He yelled across the sandfield at Sasuke, shaking sweat from his hair like Kiba's white-furred mutt. Sasuke sighed, feeling thoroughly exhausted, not having entirely recovered from overexerting himself on chakra pills just days ago. As he watched Naruto take his third dose, Sasuke found himself wishing his blonde companion had been just slightly allergic to the Ashu, just enough where they had an excuse to go back. But of course, Naruto had no reaction, certainly would have saved him from having to walk into the desert and rile himself up with Naruto's challenges. There was a part of Sasuke that loved to challenge Naruto, to spar until his limbs were heavy, mottled with bruising, and he could lay on his back that night and feel released from his thoughts, just feel the soreness of his body and the satisfying memories of getting a few ones in on his Biju friend. But today, Sasuke felt half in the fight and often found himself tossing distracted glances back toward to the sand village. Enough, Naruto. I think we've tested them enough. Let's head back. Powering down, Naruto shouted, You tired, Sasuke? You're off your game today. And even though Sasuke told himself not to react to Naruto's goading statement, he still found himself scoffing. Unlike you, loser, I haven't just been sitting around doing nothing. Naruto pointed an annoyed finger in his direction. Flirting with Sakura doesn't count. Sasuke whipped his head in his friend's direction and narrowed his deadly purple and red glare at the knucklehead, who was grinning and laughing at Sasuke's reaction. You should see your face. Sasuke scowled, half tempted to shoot another fireball in the obnoxious Jinchuriki's direction, but he would need another chakra pill to do so, and Sasuke didn't want to risk consuming 3 in a row, despite Sakura's claim of reduced side effects. He was completely spent. Any more and Sasuke might really overdo it and he couldn't risk being completely bedridden. Not with Sakura's attackers out there somewhere still organizing a retaliation. Sasuke struck with his words. I don't know what you're talking about. And I'm not tired. Don't you see the sun setting? We need to head back to meet with the Kazekage. Naruto turned to appraise the sun for the first time, and the vibrant red of the sunset cast a crimson glow on their skin and clothes, projecting lengthy shadows of their stooped, heavily breathing figures on the ruby sand beneath them. All right, fine. Just to save your Uchiha pride. Naruto exclaimed, rolling his purpling jaw and stiff shoulders. I'll definitely be stealing some of those pills for future use. Sasuke scoffed again and joined his friend as they trudged back through the red-tinted sand at a slower pace, the both of them trying to disguise limping. Naruto even stumbled once in the deep sand and instead of catching himself, he purposefully sprawled out onto his back and Sasuke came to stand over him. Don't make me drag you back, he hissed threateningly. But Naruto just raised his hand and said, 5-minute break. Sasuke didn't even argue, grateful for the rest, but he was also simultaneously anxious to be back. Unlike Naruto, he didn't allow himself to sit. He was afraid he might not be able to get back up. You know, Naruto wheezed between heavy breaths. I may be oblivious the majority of the time, but not when it comes to you two. Things are different between you, aren't they? Sasuke released a sigh into his hand, not because he was annoyed, although he was very much tempted to disguise it as annoyance, but because the weight of no one knowing and keeping it a secret from Naruto was no longer a burden, he had already guessed it. And so, Sasuke nodded with a confirmatory, HN. And then Naruto was grinning, larger than Sasuke had ever seen the knucklehead grin. There was even a tear that slid down the right side of his friend's sand-dusted cheek as he gazed up into the darkening sky. Naruto covered his eyes to disguise the tears with the crook of his arm as he grinned and whispered, "Finally." Sasuke's first reaction was to insult him for the crying, but he was honestly genuinely affected by this ninja's emotion, and Sasuke for once in his life wanted to confide in someone who knew Sasuke's entire history, his past, his everything. "I'm afraid," Sasuke confessed. "How do you love someone without spending every waking second worrying about them?" Naruto sat up at that, leaning on one elbow as his body rotated in Sasuke's direction. "You're still concerned that something will happen to her?" Sasuke just nodded again, giving voice to one of his innermost thoughts. "Yes. Because of me. Because of who I am. Haven't you already realized that Sakura is going to be a target because of who she is? Look at the current situation. She's a medic ninja out there changing the world and one of the most capable shinobi we know. If you're going to be with anyone, Sasuke, Sakura is the only one who can handle all that come with it." Sasuke found himself nodding because he had realized this recently. Everything Naruto just said, Sasuke had thought himself. He could now fully appreciate the fact that Sakura's life would be threatened regardless of her association with him. But he needed to hear someone say it, the confirmation he was looking for from the universe that set his heart at ease. "If anything," Naruto began, standing and dusting the sand from his clothes. "Her association with all of us keeps her protected." Sasuke raised a brow in confusion, but Naruto continued. "She may be hunted for her connection to us, the Kage's student, the Jinchuriki's friend, and the last surviving Uchihas." He trailed off, and Sasuke narrowed his eyes dangerously, daring him to say the word. But Naruto chose to finish that sentence with, "partner," and Sasuke found that he and Sakura had even referred to one other as such, so the word felt appropriate. "But," Naruto continued, "her particular connections to us protect her, too. Who's going to risk the wrath of us in order to get to her?" "This damn anti-peace organization," Sasuke answered, immediately finding a hole in Naruto's explanation. He wanted to mention Kido, that madman who had tried to use Sakura to get his Sharingan, but Sasuke decided against that one. Naruto waved away that answer, stating, "Tanagakure was neutral in the war. If this organization truly originates there, they didn't witness our abilities. There will always be instances that Sakura is targeted, but we will remind them every time who she is and who she belongs to. If she doesn't remind them herself, first." Sasuke added. "Exactly," Naruto agreed, clapping Sasuke on the shoulder. Dot. Kakashi and Shikamaru were the only two waiting in the Kage's office when Gaara and his two accompanying siblings entered. Kakashi and Shikamaru glanced between one another tensely, aware of the news they would soon share with the Kage. Immediately after Sakura's conversation and departure, Kakashi had found the lazy ninja strolling the streets carefree with Temari. Wrestling him away with the official business excuse, Shikamaru had sighed, "This early? I thought I had until this evening. What a drag." Once Kakashi had confidentially reported Sakura's plans for an independent mission, Shikamaru had initially argued with him about her decision, stating it was unnecessary for her to take the risk. That was, until Kakashi had told him everything. The plan, the details, everything Sakura had confessed to Kakashi as a ninja would to their Kage. "I don't like it," Shikamaru sighed with his head in his hand, "but it might just work. We need to meet with her and discuss strategy." "She's already left," Kakashi interrupted, and Shikamaru dropped his hands from his face in shock. "Already? Leaving immediately was imperative," Kakashi explained, and by the look on Shikamaru's face, he had already made the connection that it had to do with the other two members of Team 7. Kakashi continued with, "We can send her your advice by Hawk." Shikamaru groaned, telling Naruto and Sasuke is going to be such a drag. That was definitely going to be a mountain that Kakashi was not looking forward to. But before facing that mountain, he had a bridge to cross, and that bridge was none other than telling the Kage he had made a decision as the Hokage despite the Kage's careful planning. As the case cage sat cordially behind his desk, ready to scheme and discuss tactics, Kakashi sat across from him, grateful that Gaara was usually a level-headed and understanding leader and was typically easy to work with. But just before Kakashi could blurt out Sakura's plan, a blue-haired sand shinobi entered the room, pushing a rather drab-looking ninja medic whom Kakashi instantly recognized as the man responsible for betraying Sakura to a group of vigilantes. Kakashi raised a curious eyebrow at Mako's sudden presence, and Kakashi assumed it had something to do with information garnished from his interrogation. "The prisoner who keeps asking for you, Lord Casecage," the ninja stated respectfully as he pushed Mako to his knees on the floor before Gaara, who seemed slightly annoyed with his unexpected appearance. "Yes, thank you." The Casecage gestured for the shinobi to leave. Mako strained his arms against a pair of sand shackles, and Kakashi noticed for the first time that the former Sunagaker medic was trying to speak past a gag of sand as it rained from his mouth. Not only was he struggling to speak, but Mako was glancing around the room into each of their faces, and Kakashi witnessed the medic's eyes widen in alarm, a panicked look Kakashi had become very familiar with from his time as a shinobi: fear. "Excuse the interruption." Gaara pardoned, and Shikamaru and Kakashi were both a little too eager in shaking their hands in dismissal, both of them more than happy for a delay in delivering their news. "Make it quick," Gaara said emotionlessly, snapping his fingers to disintegrate the manacles and gag from his mouth. "What is it you want?" Mako choked on some of the remnants of grit on his tongue and he wiped furiously from his mouth. Finally, Mako began to breathe evenly, blurting, he choked again. "You have to stop her." "Stop who?" the Casecage interrogated, a furrowed brow of confusion passing across Gaara's usual emotionless expressions. Kakashi's stomach dropped when Mako cried out, "Sakura. She left the prison this morning, asking for information. I got the impression that she was going to go looking for the enemy on her own. You can't let her." Gaara silenced the noisy vomit of words spilling out of Mako's mouth with a raised hand. He turned to Kakashi and raised an eyebrow. "Where is Sakura?" the sand wielder questioned. "Why exactly is she not here right now?" Kakashi rubbed his neck half-humoredly. "Well, about that," he began, and he heard Shikamaru sigh at his right. And so Kakashi found himself explaining the current situation, at which Gaara's eye grew wide in surprise. Just as Sakura had explained to him, and Kakashi had relayed to Shikamaru, the Hokage now recounted a censored version of Sakura's goals. He wasn't naive enough to reveal anything essential in Mako's presence. Even Temari and Kankuro exchanged worried glances between one another as Kakashi reported, and Gaara placed his fisted hand on his mouth to think. "I had thought we were on the same page, her and I." Gaara voiced. "If she goes into Tanagakure, discretion is a must. Are you sure she can handle this without our help?" Kakashi nodded. "If anyone can do this, she can." Kakashi was relieved to see him nod curtly before whispering an instruction silently to Kankuro, who dashed quickly from the room, sending a small hateful glare in Mako's direction as he exited. Mako took turns exasperatedly gaping between all of them. "You are all too confident." Mako seethed. "I should have just kept my mouth shut. She hasn't been on the battlefield since the war. She's too inexperienced for the numbers, especially going alone. Why are you working so hard to prevent her from going? Are you disappointed that her plan might not work?" Shikamaru drawled, the annoyed tone very much like his character. "She handled your team well enough." Mako laughed derisively. "Of course, her plan won't work. She said she just wants to talk to them. You're sending their target, a martyr in the name of mental health, into a nest designed for her death. Then tell us what you know." Gaara's rasping voice sounded, and Kakashi witnessed Mako tense at the legendary Jinchuriki's question. "You've chosen a second life here, correct? In exchange for your information, I'll offer you protection as long as you reside here." Mako's eyes widened at the offer and then he sighed. Kakashi saw the internal struggle still within his eyes, as if the young man truly was trying to recall everything he could remember. "I'll tell you what I told her," the prisoner exhaled as he rubbed his sore blistered wrists. I don't know much. I didn't get that far in, but I will tell you everything I do know. Better make that quick, Kakashi announced, walking to one of the windows across the room. The descending sunlight illuminated the sand ground in orange, striped by the shadows of all the buildings within the village, and two smaller shadows shuffled their way slowly towards the Cage's tower. Dot. 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 You're late, Shikamaru drawled when Sasuke practically hauled Naruto's limp body through the door of the Cage's office. Stupid idiot had walked the entire way back, but the stairs, had been too much for him. Sasuke practically dropped him on his back to the floor. Coming from you, Shikamaru. Naruto laughed, pointing an accusing finger and upside-down jeer at the lazy Hokage's assistant. You and Kakashi-sensei are always late to everything. It's Lord Hokage, Naruto, Kakashi corrected, covering his eyes with his hand, and Sasuke thought he looked like a parent who was embarrassed of his two humiliating children. You can blame Naruto, Sasuke stated bluntly as he sidestepped Naruto, already feigning disinterest in the present company. That was until his narrowed eyes met an unlikely visitor that Sasuke would have rather never seen again. Mako sat with his hands bound and mouth gagged with what appeared to be whirring sand. His silent figure observed Sasuke, blatantly staring at him in forced silence, and Sasuke could have kicked in his teeth. Sasuke didn't question Mako's presence too much. Gaara probably had him brought from the cells to testify for insider information. Moving along with a threatening glare in Mako's direction, the Uchiha positioned himself casually against the wall the farthest away from everyone and instantly became aware that Sakura had not made it to the Cage's office, yet. Sasuke mentally scolded his pink-haired teammate for her overachieving work ethic, and that kernel of uneasiness from earlier that came from Sakura's absence was back again. Maybe he should go and retrieve her. Were the chakra pills effective? Kakashi suddenly inquired, and Naruto enthusiastically answered as he sat upright once more, crossing his legs and arms simultaneously, the very same squat he often took as a genin. Yes, I took 4 in a row. He praised. Wish she could improve that terrible taste though, he mumbled lowly to himself, taking a dramatic swipe at his tongue with the pad of his right thumb and then inspecting it for a residue. Sasuke wanted to roll his eyes. As Naruto rambled on about the effects that he personally experienced from the new food pills, explaining that the results and consequences were as expected, but less serious, and how it took much longer to get there, Shikamaru laughed to himself and shook his head in disbelief. This laugh pricked Sasuke's ears and his attention switched to Kakashi, and Sasuke witnessed the Hokage and Kage exchange a quiet look, the type of glance that was charged with a silent conversation. Sasuke then turned to find Mako's heavy gaze on him, staring directly into his eyes as if he no longer feared them. The Uchiha narrowed his eyes at the man, trying his best to not let the behavior provoke him in this uncomfortable atmosphere. God, Sasuke was tired of this meeting already. Where is Sakura, by the way? Naruto glanced around, the first to address her absence since they had arrived. It may have been the only time today Sasuke wasn't annoyed at the blonde idiot. Naruto's question was interrupted and ignored when the puppet-wielding ninja appeared through the entrance, signaled Gaara with a nod, and the Kage announced, "All right then, let's get started." Sasuke had rarely felt so skeptical in his life as he did now when the sand wielder engulfed the room with sand, creating a soundproof barrier that Sasuke had witnessed him do several times. It hardened within seconds, encasing them all in one unimpenetrable room. Sasuke glanced at Naruto as his question was skipped over, and Sasuke noticed that the knucklehead, too, had a confused frown on his face. And Sasuke suddenly had a gut-wrenching feeling, because it was obvious that if Gaara was sealing the room already, it was because everyone who was expected to be there, already was. Which meant that Sakura wasn't coming. And Sasuke's gaze suddenly locked on the sand-muffled Mako, whose eyes still bore into the Uchiha's as if he had been trying to communicate with him all along, eyes that had been so cautious to meet the Sharingan and Rinnegan before, but now volunteered themselves for Sasuke's inspection. And as it finally clicked in Sasuke's brain, he called on his reduced supply of chakra and his eyes instantly morphed into the deadly purple and red. Mako slumped forward as Sasuke plowed into the ninja's memories, frantically searching for Sakura's face, reversing time so quickly that he struck through Mako's memories like electricity, faster than the streaks of lightning of his Chidori. Finally, his charged consciousness of his lightning-style chakra illuminated the memories containing her. Finally, Sasuke witnessed her sitting before Mako's cell, eye to eye on the other side of the bars crafted from sand. Sasuke paused and played out her questions to Mako. Where is the heart of your organization? Are they based in Tanagakure? How many members? When Sasuke stumbled through the rest of their conversation, hearing Mako ask Sakura to take him with her to help her with her plan, and then experiencing Mako's panic at realizing that Sakura planned to go alone, Sasuke felt the same fear again. That same fear he had felt many times in the past, and now found himself feeling again. Everything suddenly made dreadful sense. Gaara surrounding the room with sand, an action that Sasuke had misunderstood to be soundproofing, the exchanged glances, and even Sakura asking he and Naruto to test the food pills so they would both be too physically drained to pursue her. Damn it. Sasuke felt like a fool. He felt betrayed, afraid, and so cross with everyone for their part in Sonora's self-sacrificing mission. Too late, a veil of sand came before Mako's eyes, the sand creating an impassable window to stop Sasuke's genjutsu. But Sasuke had already learned what he needed to know and he withdrew from Mako's head like a snake that had bitten him. Mako gasped from the shock of it and the entire room turned to watch the medic slump forward onto the ground, not having witnessed the silent exchange, but realizing something had just happened. Gaara's efforts to stop the genjutsu said a lot to Sasuke about how the Kazekage wanted to handle this confrontation, slowly, easily, and as emotionless as possible. But as Sasuke met the Kazekage's eyes and Sasuke didn't retract his emotional prowess, everyone in the room suddenly realized that Sasuke had discovered their closely guarded secret, and the Uchiha didn't plan on calmly playing along with their plans. Naruto, Sasuke drawled, his voice as low and heavy as the rumble that resounded when the ground shook on a war-torn battlefield. His next words had sharpened to accusatory ice. Sakura's not coming. She left Sunagakure on her own. Naruto shot up from the ground as if he hadn't just crawled his way up the steps moments ago. What? He questioned the others, his gaze coming to rest on Kakashi who was putting a hand up already in an attempt to calm the Uzumaki. Why don't you both sit down, so I can explain the situation to you, their sensei began, but his words only registered in Naruto's head as a confirmation of Sasuke's sudden declaration. What? Naruto screeched, pointing a finger at all of them. You let her go by herself. To do what? Fight. Alone. Sasuke's immediate desire was to jump through space and time, directly through the portal of his choosing, bypassing everything altogether, the explanations, the defensive behavior, the justification of Sakura's choices. But he was drained, just as Sakura had planned, damn her, and that only left Sasuke able to move to the door, instead. When he found the sand thickening around it, he turned and flashed his red and purple glare at Gaara. Even your sand will burn in the fires of Amaterasu, Sasuke threatened dangerously. You can't hold me here. In the next moment, Kakashi had his hand on Sasuke's shoulder and the Uchiha turned his glare back on him. This is her plan, Sasuke. A covert operation with one person is discreet. She can handle this. Hear us out. Sasuke sucked in a sharp breath at the words that just came out of Kakashi's mouth, the very words Sasuke had used to try and persuade Sakura to let him handle the situation himself. Sakura had listened, told Sasuke it was irrational, but had really gone and decided to take his idea and do it herself. His hand found his painful eyes. Fuck. 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 And they had agreed. Kakashi had agreed. Sasuke was so furious at himself for giving her the idea, but not as enraged at the Hokage for sending her. You think she can kill them? He suddenly hissed in Kakashi's face. I watched her spare the life of that bastard who betrayed her. Sasuke spat in Mako's unconscious direction. I've watched her spare the life of the monster who almost took the use of her arm away. There are countless others. She killed one of them, Shikamaru defended, because it became necessary. And Sasuke hated the strategist ninja once again, for his entitlement to a say. He didn't know her. None of them knew Sakura the way that her own teammates did, including Sasuke himself. She only killed the one who hurt that kid, Sasuke retorted, cursing his own damn depleted state of chakra that was forcing him to sit and reason with these idiots. None of the ones who touched her suffered any sort of consequence. How many times? Kakashi asked lowly, but loud enough for them all to hear. How many times must she prove herself to you, Sasuke? Sasuke gritted his teeth in frustration, his blood pulsing in his head from the chakra depletion-induced headache forming there. The truth was, that this wasn't an issue to him anymore. He believed in her abilities. He had witnessed them, himself. And as he had explained to Sakura as he had wrapped his arms around her in the moonlight of last night, his faith in her didn't change the fact that Sasuke would worry. That Sasuke would go after her. Every single time. Why? Because he loved Sakura, and a man in love with someone didn't need an excuse to make sure she never faced anything alone, not as Sasuke had for years. Sakura's enemies were his enemies. Her battles, his battles. Always, theirs. Tell us where she's gone, Kakashi. Naruto interrupted, derailing both Sasuke's thoughts and their sensei's attempt to convince him completely. Sakura is our teammate. I don't care what her plan is. We fight as a team. Sasuke saw it in their faces, the wavering. Naruto always had that effect on people when he spoke, altering their thinking and changing their minds, easily. Kakashi remained on course, however. You can't follow her, Naruto. Everyone in the shinobi world knows who you are. They would recognize you instantly. Remember what I said earlier. Leaf shinobi can't enter into Tanagakure without consequence. It's neutral. You'll be starting something. And the world doesn't know Sakura. Naruto shouted in disbelief. She's just as recognizable as any of us. Is just as important to the Leaf. Sakura has many different strengths she can draw from, Kakashi continued. She doesn't have to rely on a ninjutsu that could give her away. Not like your Rasengan, beast modes, sage art, and more. She has another plan. Naruto began to protest again, but Sasuke interjected. Fine. Naruto can stay here. What? His friend screeched, rounding on him instantly, but Sasuke ignored him. The idea was mine originally, Sasuke explained to Kakashi. Sakura just stole it. I will go and I will be as discreet as I have for the last couple of years on Konoha's behalf. Kakashi sighed. Sasuke, your involvement is not a good idea. You have your own mission. And as Kakashi began to deny him once more, Sasuke felt a sense of dread and panic as more time was slipping away from him. Each minute that passed, took Sakura further away from them and toward those who wanted to kill her. Desperation wasn't like Sasuke and he had never resorted to begging before, always being able to rely on his strength and jutsu to carry him through life, taking what he wanted, doing as he pleased, and needing permission from few. But he was growing more and more irate and more frantic, and so he risked being vulnerable in front of all these ninja who had often judged him. If I have to watch someone who I love die, sacrificing themselves for the sake of the Leaf Village, again, the person who I am now won't survive it. What's left of the shinobi world will either fall to the Otsutsuki race in my absence, or it will fall to the person I will become. He watched the fear flash across each of their faces as Sasuke's words registered throughout the room. Sasuke had been too young to help his brother bear the weight of such terrible orders from his village, but Sasuke wouldn't sit by and do nothing when Sakura was given such a mission. Is that a threat, Uchiha? Gaara grumbled and Sasuke felt the very ground, the entire sand-constructed village, shift in response to the Kazesage's wrath. Sasuke felt no fear. He didn't fear such things anymore. Sasuke, Naruto whispered as his friend placed a supportive palm on his shoulder, but Sasuke shrugged it off and stepped up to Kakashi, so close that Sasuke could see the red and purple of his own gaze in Kakashi's irises. That will be its fate if you keep me here and she dies, Kakashi. Don't make the wrong choice. He saw it in Kakashi's face. The realization that Sasuke was more dangerous to Konoha than any repercussions from Tanagakure, or any unnamed organization. Sasuke was also essential because he was the only one who could use the Rinnegan to get an edge on the Otsutsuki race. He watched the risks shift in the Hokage's mind as he weighed this new danger to the leaf. And so Kakashi didn't stop him. The sand rained down around him. They let him go. Dot. Sasuke fisted the pink hair that had been cut and placed upon a note on the foot of his bed. He had almost missed it in the darkness, but the moon as always, caught Sakura's hair in a way that nothing else could. The sight of her slashed hair, a pre-battle ritual of Sakura's, instantly caught his eye and it panicked the Uchiha even more. He wished he would have returned to their shared room earlier in the day, because Sasuke would have realized what exactly Sakura had intended to do, and he could just have avoided the cage meeting altogether and gone straight after her. He had returned now to make sure Sakura wasn't there waiting for him. Sasuke knew better, but he had still hoped. All their conversations about partnership, communication and goodbyes, and all their small promises to one another these past couple of months had given him that hope. But it was all nothing, now. Empty words because none of it prevented her from leaving him. Sasuke Uchiha had been left behind. And for the first time, he realized just how lonely and horrendously painful it was to be left behind. In the darkness, the hair fell from his hands onto the bed like Sasuke's slashed headband had once descended from his forehead. He snatched the note from the bed and separated the 2 pages with the pad of his thumb. Sasuke activated his Sharingan in the dark and forced himself to read it slowly and carefully, instead of skipping over lines in his urgency. Sasuke, it read. Sasuke, I am sorry. If you have found this letter, know that I write it because we promised one another a goodbye. This is my goodbye, for now. I thought a lot about your suggestion on how to handle this situation, and I decided to do this on my own, since I was going to be involved regardless. I have thought it through, put extensive research into how I will achieve my goal, and decided a solo mission was the best option after all. Forgive me for being a distraction to you and I hope that the time apart will give us clear heads, as you suggested last night. Focus on your mission and I will focus on mine. Keep Naruto from following. He can be impulsive, and I need to do this alone. If you don't find this until later, and I do not return, know that I love you. You have always been worthy of that love, even the darkest version of you. Save the shinobi world and remember who you are. She did not sign it. As soon as his eyes scanned the last line of pen scrawl, Sasuke was half tempted to crumble it in his hand. But his eyes found the most important words on the page. I love you, you have always been worthy of that love, remember who you are. And Sasuke realized he needed this letter as much as he needed chakra or oxygen. Because if she died, Sasuke would have to stare at it every day for the rest of his lonely existence and let it be the tether that kept him from falling apart. Sakura's trail was cold. Beyond their shared bedroom and her departing letter, there was nothing. Like a released bowstring, Sasuke had sprung forth into the night in the direction of the only detail he was certain about her plan, Tanagakure. He had plucked this detail from Mako's memories like a healer digs out pieces of metal in a flesh wound. The physical toll of traveling non-stop overnight while chakra depleted had cost the Uchiha, and he had been tempted several times to just pop another chakra pill into his mouth. However, he couldn't risk taking it in case he came upon a situation where he would need it in combat. So, Sasuke had trudged through the sand all night, wrapping his hair and face with the black cloth of his turban, pulling the hood of his traveling poncho up and over his hair to better disguise himself. Sasuke didn't want to even waste chakra on a simple transformation jutsu. He had to be discreet, after all. Sasuke arrived at the jagged mountainous ribcage surrounding Tanagakure the following evening, gaining entrance easily as an unrecognizable traveler in a world of peace. His eyes searched for any flash of pink and he stopped at every place he could think where Sakura might start her search for the organization bent on killing her. The hospital she made Sasuke stay at just so she could visit the medical facilities here, and even their old hotel room, but there was no sign of her. After hours of staking out with no word or sign, Sasuke cursed himself for not gathering more information about her plan from Kakashi before pursuing her. His inability to find even a trace of her just went to show that Sasuke was always a little too confident in himself and still found himself habitually underestimating Sakura's skill. As the sun began to set, Sasuke wanted nothing more than to approach every single soul crowding the streets in the evening lantern-lit dusk and ask if anyone had seen her, but Sasuke couldn't risk the suspicion it would rouse about his own identity. Who was he and why did he want to know? How did he know her and where could they find him if they did see her? He could already hear the questions and he didn't want any rumors to make it to the leadership of this village. Discretion turned out to be a lot more difficult when you were panicking. And so, Sasuke perched himself on the roof above a crowded izakaya, where many individuals were flocking to participate in nighttime drinking, and he did the only thing he could think of. Watch and wait for a word, a clue, the breath of her name or description between the boisterous laughter of intoxicated patrons. In the darkness of night, when the starlight outshone the dimming lanterns, Sasuke even became desperate for the crickets to sigh but a syllable of her name. But like everyone else, they gave him nothing. Sasuke released a frustrated sigh, adding another useless sound to the nightscape around him as he jumped down from the building, too restless to do anything but pace the streets and wonder how he ever ended up like this. Sakura fingered her dark hair in the reflection of the ink-stained water in the bucket at her feet. She scrubbed at the lingering residue of black dye running past her hairline and wrapped the towel in her hands quickly around her short hair. When Sakura heard the crack of the door, she flashed the woman who entered a quick grin. "You dyed it." The youngest girl of the group, Tabi exclaimed, falling to her knees beside Sakura with her hands covering her mouth. "But it's your best feature. You would attract the attention of everyone." Sakura shook her head, wanting to say something along the lines of, "That's exactly the point," but she didn't for the obvious reason of blowing her cover. And despite what she had told the headmistress of the bathhouse, Sakura didn't plan on being here long, just long enough to gather the intel she needed in order to move into the next phase of her plan. "Mother will not be happy," the girl stated, reaching over to finger a stray lock of jet that escaped from the bundle atop Sakura's head. "Mother," Sakura responded, using the same honorific for the headmistress, "will hopefully understand my reasons. I don't want to stand out too much." Tabi shook her head, saying, "Is it permanent? How long will it last? Will the steam from the bath ruin it?" Sakura shook her head, grateful she could be honest with the young girl with at least one thing. "It should hold for a couple of days, if not more. The sooner it fades back to rose, the better," Tabi stated matter-of-factly, rising to move to the other side of the room that they shared to begin the evening ritual of preparing for the night's work. Sakura copied her experienced movements, powdering her face while her hair dried, carefully concealing the purple diamond between her brows. Infiltrating this job had been easier than Sakura had anticipated given the reputation of difficulty in this line of work. Sakura had approached the headmistress as a transfer from another establishment. Due to Tanagakure's exclusive nature from the outside world, it was not difficult to acquire fabricated copies of the necessary paperwork indicating a private transfer from another village, and Sakura easily produced the medical assessments of her health that was also required. It also didn't hurt that Sakura's coloring was considered rare and possibly desirable by some. In other words, she would be highly profitable. Sakura promised the headmistress a steep percentage for every patron she pleased. Or would allegedly please. No, Sakura did not plan to violate herself in order to gain the information she was looking for. She had never stooped into this role before in all her mission activity, but Ino had once used the disguise in order to slip into minds of her targets more easily once she got them isolated, and no harm could befall her body once she performed the jutsu. Sakura had only acquired empty leads since she had arrived in Tanagakure. All Sakura needed to do was assess, learn what she could from the right people, and transition into the next step of her plan. The infiltration was the easy part, but this next part was dangerous, and Sakura would have to tread so very carefully. "Why are you here, Tabi?" Sakura couldn't resist asking, wondering how such a lovely girl ended up servicing despicable men at one of the secretive bathhouse locations in the shinobi world. "How did you end up in a place like this?" Tabi eyed Sakura curiously for a second before laughing. "I could ask the same about you." And then she didn't talk to Sakura for the rest of the evening as they prepped for the night. Sakura followed the other girls into the establishment, a building disguised as a common bathhouse in the front section, advertising the typical bathhouse amenities, but concealing the back half, which included private baths and rooms. When a section of the wall slid back to reveal a dark sitting room, Sakura had to steel herself and conceal an inner cringe under the stares of the lounging men who were already expecting them in the luxury-style waiting room. Sakura never felt so disgusted in her entire life than she did in that moment under the predatory gazes of those who only sought to devour others and pleasure themselves. Sakura immediately found herself second-guessing this step. Maybe this hadn't been such a clever idea. But she had no other choice. The members of the organization had been able to conceal themselves in a neutral territory long enough to gain numbers and begin operation. To Sakura, this meant one of three things. The first and most unlikely option was that this anti-peace organization had managed to keep their activity low enough to avoid detection and that Tanakage was truly focused on other things. Sakura doubted this one. The village was simply too small to have as many members as Mako had claimed go undetected. Or there was a very real possibility that the Kajin Council were already aware and didn't take action because powerful figures were involved, maybe even leadership, or they simply did not care. When the door was shut behind them, Sakura watched the other girls disappear into the noisy room hazed with pipe smoke, making their way toward familiar patrons. Socialization seemed to be a part of the selection process, to intensify the excitement, and Sakura planned to take advantage of it. She held her breath as she navigated, walking up to Tabi, who had already familiarly climbed into the lap of one of the younger men, apparently a returning patron of hers. "Is this a new friend?" The man drawled thickly through a handful of Tabi's hair that he had twirled throughout his fingers and pressed to his mouth. At Tabi's sudden wide-eyed expression at Sakura's appearance, Sakura answered for herself, soothing Tabi's fears in the same sentence. Sakura knew the look of someone who felt threatened by her presence, and Tabi was giving her a warning stare for approaching her patron. "Yes. Guda hey, sir," Sakura introduced with a bow. "I am new. Perhaps you could introduce me to any friends that you might be in company with." Around her, the socialization had already begun, and men who had already found their women for the evening began to mingle with their associates, the girls clinging to their arms like trophies. Several of them appraised Sakura from a distance, naturally curious at the new face. But Sakura wasn't going to just be picked from the lot like a prized animal ripe for butcher. No. Instead, Sakura would be choosing amongst them in the form of an introduction, just as she had planned. Tabi nodded, exclaiming, "Yes. This is her first night, so she doesn't know anyone." Tabi smiled back at the man who was running his hands possessively over her leg in the dim light around them as he debated whether this unexpected disturbance would be beneficial in some way, or if he should just whisk Tabi away to their private room. "Could you introduce her to some friends, Toka-san?" Toka smirked. "Any favor for you, dear," he murmured into Tabi's hair. "If you're willing to return it." The words dropped into Sakura's stomach to spoil like rotten food. This wasn't good. Sakura didn't want anyone to suffer anything personally from her meddling, especially not a woman as nice to her as Tabi had been. Just as she was fixing to retract her request, Intent to say never mind, Tabi was helping the man in the lounge chair to his feet, twirling his arm around her neck as they walked toward the crowd gathering in the back of the room. The haze grew thicker around the smoking men as they lounged against the shadow-cloaked walls, and Sakura bowed to them when Toka stopped and held out his hand smoothly for Sakura to take. Masking her face to conceal her repulsion, Sakura slid her fingers into Toka's waiting palm and he held her hand above her head to spin her in a half-pirouette in front of his curious counterparts. The way each of their eyes clung to different parts of her body had Sakura feeling like she might retch. "Guda hey," Toka introduced, dropping her hand as if he were a gentleman. Sakura knew he was anything but. "She's new here. Tabi asked that I introduce her to you all." Sakura's eyes fluttered as she feigned shyness, bringing her shoulders innocently up for a small second. There were exchanged smiles amongst some of the men as they debated their current choices, but Sakura's eyes assessed them back, weighing her options and gathering what little intel she could gather from them. At the center of the pack, Sakura's medical eye immediately located a man with his eyes tightly bound with bandaging. He was quiet as he tilted his ear to appraise her, solemn with two girls on each of his knees as he sat in one of the red, luxuriously tufted high-back chairs. And Sakura marked him as someone of little interest to her despite the initial surprise of his blindness. His injuries could mean several things, either good or bad for her purposes, but Sakura also could tell that whatever had happened to him had potentially wizened him, and Sakura didn't need to approach that type of person. The fact that his injury potentially revealed his status as a former ninja put him on Sakura's radar, but she also believed he might be worth investigating at a distance. Sakura's eyes scanned over the rest of their smoking and laughing personas. "New in what way?" One of the men joked loudly as the rest of them snickered with shiny, interested eyes. "New here, or new. Sakura wanted to sneer at such a suggestive question, curl her lip and let her inner Sakura bleed through her teeth and down into her firsts. "I'm from the land of fire," she revealed, weighing the various reactions to such a revelation. And several eyes flickered to her, assessing her differently. "The land of fire?" asked the loud man again as he crossed his arms. "Can't be Konoha. I've never heard of such an establishment in the Leaf. Not recently, anyway." The others agreed around him, but Sakura didn't reveal that answer. She had made her cast, throwing the lure out onto the smoke-infused water, dangling the bait in the crocodile faces of 6 influential men. By smiling and shrugging her shoulders and keeping the mystery of her origin concealed, Sakura was reeling in that line and establish her own draw. Sakura moved toward the loud one, painting a saccharine grin on her face. He was going to be the one to spill secrets, Sakura could tell. He had a mouth on him like Naruto. "Are you familiar with Konoha?" Sakura asked him sweetly as she moved into his inner circle, receiving a glare from the woman on his arm. "I've never been to the Leaf, but had many patrons from there," she continued. Before she even learned the man's name, Sakura's fingers were grasped carefully once again, the same application of force that Toka had just touched her with, and she was being tugged back around to face the group of men. The rougher man with the bandaging around his eyes had stood to retrieve her, reeling her in towards him as if she were the bait on the line. "Don't waste your time on him. He's a clown." Sakura's instinctual reaction was to become solid, send chakra to her feet and become as immovable as her inhuman strength would allow her to be. It took her only a millisecond to resolve herself, to recommit to her plan, and Sakura became supple despite her annoyance with the man who felt too important to be overlooked by her. The 2 women who had once sat on his lap were gone and he replaced them with her, pulling her down to sit on his right knee. She still stiffened despite her resolve, realizing once again how dangerous the people were whom she was trying to play with. This guy was lucky, so incredibly lucky that Sakura's purpose here was not to kill every single one of them. "I can tell you about Konoha," he spoke lowly, a whisper as the conversation resumed around them, as he bent his head into her blackened hair. Sakura could feel the rumble of his voice in his chest as he said, "What is it that you want to know?" Sakura couldn't help herself. She turned her left shoulder into him to create more distance as she watched him carefully. Are you from there? She asked, wary that this man might be able to recognize her despite her careful disguise. No, he answered, but I know several men who are. Are you a ninja? She questioned again, trying with everything in her to relax into this man's embrace. Where their bodies touched, Sakura felt as if he were like a boiling acid, searing and burning at the connection points. Have you been with a ninja? He countered, and Sakura recognized his attempt to avoid answering the question. Who do you think visited my previous establishment in the Land of Fire? He chuckled, a mirthful laugh that lasted a little too long to make anyone comfortable. His next words sent an electricity through her blood. What I wouldn't give to see your face as you lie to everyone around you that you're a sex worker like the rest of them. Her eyes grew wide as she checked to see if anyone heard what he had said. Most of the couples had already retired to their rooms, so Sakura forced her breathing into a steady cadence of ease and indifference. She turned to him slowly. I don't know what you mean. Her hand was taken lightly into his and she resisted the urge to snatch it back as he guided it to his cheek, splaying her fingers across the side of his head with his own as he grinned wickedly. Your face was the last thing that I saw before I lost my vision. I'll never forget the sound of your voice, Haruno Sakura. ... When the door closed behind them, Sakura snatched her hand from the blind man who had led her privately to one of the sauna rooms where extracurriculars were expected to take place. Sakura's initial plan for this part was immediately interrupted. Pulling a kunai from her tightly fitted silk attire, Sakura spun and pinned the mysterious man against the black wood of the closed door, kunai flush against the flesh of his throat. Beyond the slight tilt of his chin skyward, the man had no reaction. Who are you? She hissed. All pretenses and disguises temporarily dropped. The man chuckled against her blade. It's not surprising you don't remember me. The battlefield of the war was so gruesome and so many men at your mercy, my face was one in a sea of millions. Sakura couldn't help but think of Sato, Isao's father, and Sato's wife, whom Sakura had failed to save. Isao's mother, too, had been one of millions. Sakura desperately searched for any recognition and came up blank. She remembered healing hundreds of visual injuries, this man had only been one of them. A heavy weight settled in her gut as she realized that, like all those others, his injuries had most likely been passed off to others because of the minority of them in comparison to those on the brink of dying. Severed appendages, organ damage, bleeding. Going blind was unfortunate, but not life-threatening. Sakura asked the next obvious question. Are you one of the people out to kill me? Yes, actually. He admitted, and Sakura pressed the blade deeper, contemplating the pros and cons of killing him on the spot. But, he added lightly, avoiding the dipping of his throat against the bite of her kunai's sharpness. Since I was lucky enough to find you first, I will make you a deal. Why should I even believe a word out of your mouth? Because you have something that I want, he answered, a hand coming up to grip her own. But he couldn't move the fisted blade away because Sakura's hand was as unmovable as steel as she no longer suppressed her immaculate strength. And what is that? She interrogated, unperturbed by his words. Your abilities, he smiled. Heal my eyes completely, and I'll help you. I've been betrayed once already by a fellow member of yours, Sakura revealed. I won't make the same mistake twice. Trusting you is the last thing I am going to do. Another chuckle reverberated up his chest like the swell of a wave in a turbulent ocean. Then don't trust me. But I am afraid that you have no other choice to work with me. And why is that? Because all of your friends are being watched carefully. And to your soon-to-be dismay, a certain Uchiha has been identified here within Tanagakure, and he is looking for you. The Zenshin's plans for him aren't a part of your plans, are they? Sakura's kunai bounced as her hand shook in surprise at his words and it nicked his throat once before she steadied it. He hissed and pulled harder against her hand, but it still didn't move. He is here, Sakura asked in a whisper, a myriad of paths of possibility spidering out from the revelation. Sasuke had followed her. Despite her wishes and despite Kakashi's promises of keeping Naruto and Sasuke preoccupied, Sasuke had followed her. Not Naruto, but Sasuke. Even if it was out of concern for her, why? Why did he continue to doubt her abilities? Sakura pushed those feelings to the back of her mind as a new thought formed around the name of the organization that wanted to kill her and many others, Zenshin. To advance. Progression. The exact same word that Mako had declared to her in the desert wind only nights ago. She finally had the name. Here and unsuccessful in his search for you, is what I have heard, came the blind man's sultry response in her face. We knew you had to be close if he was here sniffing for you. Damn it. Her plans were already starting to unravel. She was banking on the fact that they might not believe her brave enough to confront them, alone and in their own territory. On the off chance you're actually telling the truth, Sakura growled, you lot are absolute fools to underestimate Sasuke. He and Naruto are single-handedly the strongest shinobi to have ever walked this earth. He will mow you down just as Madara did to the Shinobi Alliance. What about you? He asked, a smirk tugging on the corner of his mouth despite the knife still secured against his flesh, nearly vibrating with the energy it was taking Sakura not to silence him permanently. How strong are you? In the next movement, Sakura sheathed the weapon and relaxed her face into a smile of her own. I am not far behind them. The blind man instinctively rubbed his neck where her kunai had been, smearing the pinpricks of blood there. You're lucky that even blind, my senses are sharper than my companions, he spoke, seriousness replacing the nervous humor of his previous persona. By claiming you first, I have saved you from the lions you were prowling amongst just outside. Which ones in the sitting room are a part of Zenshin? Sakura asked, and her eyes grew terribly wide at the next admission from his mouth. Why, all of them, he laughed once again. All of them. If the man had been able to see, he would have noticed that Sakura's face had drained of all color. Sakura's mental efforts doubled as she began to cross out steps of her plan and recalculate, following the conceptual intricate spiderweb of possible effects from each detour she could potentially plan for. He took a step toward her. And all of them were already suspecting your identity the very minute Toka introduced you. I happen to be the only one present who has ever heard your voice. My actions to grab your attention will have interested them even more. I'll have to explain what I did tonight. Your next move will determine the words that will come out of my mouth. Sakura nodded, still silently assessing her options, before she said, remove the bandage. The man hesitated, as if he was almost unsure if he wanted her to see what lay beneath. He only hesitated for a moment before fingering the white bandage. He walked toward her until he was only a few feet ahead of her. When the bandage slipped down to reveal his eye sockets, Sakura frowned at the unblemished nature of them. Not an external injury that could be healed, then. She had been hoping for cataracts or some other resolvable issue via procedure. He flinched as she touched his temples, tilting his head back so Sakura could peer into them. She summoned her chakra to her fingertips and pressed exploratory chakra into them. He gasped at the invasion when her chakra made contact with his flesh, and his hand came up to grasp onto Sakura's wrist. I'm only investigating the injury, Sakura reassured him. I know, he frowned. You did so once before. You told me there was little that could be done. Sakura nodded, feeling dread at her past self's words. If she had not been able to heal them, she suspected no one could. Sakura suddenly recalled the Shinobi War and Kakashi-sensei, whose eye had been torn from his eye socket by Madara and then restored by Naruto, through his perfected yin-yang release through the sun seal given to him by Hagoromo. Naruto was not only able to restore Kakashi's eye from nothing, but he had also been able to revive Obito after the extractions of the 10 tails, and accomplish other grand healing feats during the war in the duration of which he had possessed the seal. Both Naruto and Sasuke relinquished their sun and moon seals when they sealed Kagaya. That sort of healing power was gone now. Sakura possessed and could control both yin and yang chakra due to her healing training under Tsunade and her natural affinity for genjutsus. Even with Sakura's near-perfect control of chakra, she could not use yin and yang simultaneously as Naruto had done with Hagoromo's seal. Are you able to see anything at all? Lights, shadows, shapes. There was a big difference between being blind and being visually impaired. While others saw nothing but darkness, some could still make out some glimpses of their surroundings. Nothing. Not since the war. Sakura frowned as she searched the eyes with her chakra. The eyes themselves were undamaged. The optic nerves intact. The retinas whole. They were clear in appearance, with startling dark irises. Black, like Sasuke's. No clouding. There was only one possible cause left: brain damage. Sakura frowned at how hopeless the situation was. Do you have any pain? No, he answered. Would pain be a good sign that the body is trying to heal? Sakura winced at his train of thought. People often believed that pain meant the body was trying to repair itself, and that if there was no pain, it meant one of two things: the body was not damaged, or whatever healing was to be done was complete. This was not the case for many injuries. If he was experiencing pain, it might just indicate a different type of injury. Saying he had no pain was just strengthening Sakura's suspicion. Reaching to cup the back of his head, Sakura pushed her fingertips into his scalp. He winced at the contact. Were you hit in the back of the head during the war? Is that how you lost your vision? He nodded, grinding down his teeth as she determined the truth he hadn't offered freely. Brain damage was irreversible. Sakura could not create new pathways for nerves. She felt the dead end her chakra reached after traveling down the optic nerves. The visual cortexes of the occipital lobe at the very back of the brain was no longer receiving signals from the eye. Sakura suspected that he probably had been told this by multiple healers and was hoping she would arrive at a different conclusion. What's your name? She asked, feigning medical indifference to his injury. She wasn't ready to reveal her deductions while he was still in the mood to answer her questions. You can call me Rugo. It's what the others call me. Sakura nodded, understanding why he wasn't going to divulge his real identity to her. She decided not to ask what village he was from originally, which was going to be her next question. Tanagakure had been neutral in the war, and since he had allegedly fought in the war, he had either migrated here after the war, or he came to be a part of Zenshin mission, specifically. How many members of Zenshin are ninja from other villages? She questioned instead while she still had the opportunity. He hesitated for a moment, before admitting. Most of them. Sakura frowned at that. Just how many ninja had been unsatisfied with their lives after the war that they believed healing the grievances of the next generation stood in the way of progression. Is your vision loss why you joined Zenshin? She asked boldly, trying her best to understand his particular motives. Something as significant as blindness could make the kindest of people bitter. If that was the source of his bitterness, Sakura didn't understand why he wanted to allow such anger spread for the sake of strength and progression in the next generation of ninja. He did not answer at first, but then said, yes, it is the reason. But I did not join Zenshin to prevent you and others from healing the trauma of ninja. I joined to find you. You are the only one who can help me now. Sakura sighed at his confession and pulled her hands away, but Rugo caught them desperately, a sharp contrast to his cocky charisma. If you can heal them, I'll help you. Don't tell me what the other healers say. I know that you can fix this. Sakura pulled her hands free, hesitant to disappoint him. She fumbled silently in her pocket for an item that she had prepared for the next phase of this night once she was alone in this room with whichever man was unlucky enough to become her recipient, even though it hadn't exactly happened how she had planned. I am sorry, Rugo. Brain damage cannot be reversed. I cannot heal them. The man frowned deeply at her words, shaking his head. He was not expecting the sharp prick in his neck that came next. Sakura pushed down on the plunger that pushed the harmless sedative into his bloodstream. Ironically, as a medic, Sakura couldn't help but notice the widening of his eyes as the muscles registered his surprise, which indicated that the cerebellum, the separate part of the brain in control of muscles, still operated perfectly. He crashed to his knees before falling forward as she caught him. She wished she had the time to tell him that he was lucky, so incredibly lucky to only have lost his vision from the type of head injury that he had received. If any other parts of the brain had been damaged, he would have likely lost his ability to speak, to control his muscles, to walk. He could have become paralyzed. Maybe, if he were still alive, they could have this conversation in the future after she executed her plan. Sakura was only a little disappointed that she hadn't been able to accept Rugo's offer of assistance as an inside source. After all, whether or not he had intended to, the Zenshin member had already given her the information she was looking for. And Sakura never really needed anyone's help anyway. Not Rugo's. And not Sasuke's, either. Only when Sakura turned on the tap water for the bath that wouldn't be used after all, and she was certain the sound of it would keep her from being disturbed by the head matron, did Sakura bite into her flesh. Blood pooling at the tip of her finger, Sakura placed her thumb against her palm and pushed her 5 fingers into the ground, performing the summoning technique. Lady Katsuyu, Sakura greeted the small slug, 1/1000th of her original body, that began to climb its way over the legs of the man she had just incapacitated. Sakura knelt, using her blood-smeared finger to trace an intricate symbol on Rugo's temple. The blood pooling where she had traced, and small trails hastily dissected from the main paths to trickle down into the hair at his temples. "You're certain this will work?" Sakura asked the human-sized slug that reached up to cover the man's unmoving face with her body. "It should," Katayu reassured her. "The blood is just an extra step of assurance. I should be able to do this on my own without it." Sakura nodded, sparing the little extra chakra it took to stop the blood flowing freely from her thumb without completely healing it. She was going to have to repeatedly break the skin there as the night continued, so growing new skin was not needed. "This is the first of many." "Sakura, dear," Katsuyu responded as the slug divided into an even smaller version of herself and slipped into Sakura's outstretched palm while the main body completely consumed the man Sakura had incapacitated. "Please be careful." "Of course, milady. I'm sorry for what you will witness from this moment on." She tucked the slug away into the hem of her robe's neckline. Sakura opened the door to her room and turned to stare down the hallway at all the closed doors concealing the fellow members of Zenshin. It was the sheer lack of activity that he was witnessing in his observation spots that first alerted Sasuke that something wasn't quite right. In every town, if someone positioned themselves correctly, there would be brawling to spectate, scandals to witness, information to gather, but not in Tanagakure, apparently. The last 24 hours had been surprisingly uneventful in comparison to his first pass through when Sasuke and Sakura had been ambushed in their sleep. It was odd how quickly they had been identified the first time in Tanagakure, but Sasuke had yet to be approached. Yes, he had been more discreet than before, but Sasuke was starting to feel annoyed both with his lack of progress in finding Sakura's whereabouts and this organization's inability to notice his whereabouts. That was, until he noticed that nothing around him was particularly noticeable. Ah, he realized. So I have been discovered. It was the only explanation for how fruitless his efforts had been to acquire any real intel about an organization fixated on killing his friend. Sasuke realized immediately that he was purposefully not being fed anything helpful. It only unnerved him when he realized just how many people must be in this group if the multitudes of people he currently watched from above were being intentionally silent. Sasuke also surmised that whatever organization this was, they were also dodging interest from the leaders of Tanagakure. They, too, were trying to fly under the radar. And so, Sasuke waited in the night, perched above the noisy izakaya once more, rain pattering against his cloak and bouncing from the brim of his black hood, content to play his role while he schemed. He contemplated doing something unexpected just to shake things up, but what would they consider unexpected? Sasuke tried to see this situation for their perspective. This organization knew that Sasuke had followed his pink-haired friend here, and that he was searching for her. They knew that Sasuke had retreated the last time he was here, whisking Sakura away in order to protect them both. They knew he was trying to be discreet so as not to cause any problems for Konoha. With that information, Sasuke deduced that they expected him to continue to look for Sakura, sit and listen discreetly until he located her, interrupt her mission to take her away. They were allowing him to do just as they expected him to in order not to alert him. To their extreme disappointment, Sasuke was smarter than everyone involved in this ridiculous plan to distract him. And so, Sasuke covered his face tightly. He planned to throw a wrench into the plan, discreetly, while still sending a very strong message to those he assumed lurked in the rain-cloaked shadows. And it wasn't going to cost him very much chakra. Unfortunately for them, thunder rumbled above him, and Sasuke inhaled the energy of the surrounding atmosphere. Unlike in his battle with Itachi, Sasuke did not have to manipulate the air with Amaterasu in order to manipulate the cumulonimbus clouds into existence. They brooded over him regardless, as if his very frustration manifested into the storm that now cast the village in a torrential downpour. For once, Sasuke saw it as a sign that the universe might actually be on his side, that his decision regarding a future with Sakura might have been the right one. One worth destroying a few buildings for. And he did exactly that. Sasuke wasn't entirely his former revenge-seeking self, one bent on the destruction of an entire village, but he smirked dangerously as a flash of lightning struck the infuriatingly useless izakaya. A lightning bolt strikes in 1/1000th of a second, and the explosion happened first. Sasuke waited on the sound to follow before he let out one quick laugh to himself. Sasuke inhaled as if it were the first real breath he had in a long while. It felt so good to let go, to cave to destruction. To push things back into motion and take control of a situation. As expected, people ran from the building, some attempting to put out the small fire in the ceiling, while others ducked for cover back into other structures and away from the smoking rooftop. The heavy rain assisted in putting it out very quickly, causing minimal damage. It wouldn't draw enough attention from those who didn't know that the lightning wasn't entirely one of nature's unfortunate disasters. Only those who were watching him as closely as he was suspecting, would realize that Sasuke was done waiting. When two ninja landed on either side of him, Sasuke's Sharingan glowed in the dark as he leaned his head back against the building, arms slung forward over one reclined knee. His Sharingan darted to each of the two men, seeing what no one else could see in the blinding shower and muddled night. Two shinobi, faces covered, stood before him, proudly adorning two headbands with that insufferable five-spiral symbol he'd seen the last time he was here and more recently glimpsed from Mako's memories. Finally, the Uchiha breathed as he rolled his neck. At his words, the two ninja, obviously assigned to monitor him, glanced at each other in surprise. Sasuke saw it cross their faces, the moment they realized they had been outplayed and forced to show themselves. The air, now electrified, lashed out on its own and more lightning crackled in the air above them. In one lightning flash, Sasuke sat unmoving against the building's side. In the very next, he had swapped with one of the men, teleporting places with him. Timing his movements with the crash of thunder, Sasuke grabbed the second by the neck and hurtled him into the first, smashing their bodies together. Sasuke justified his next actions based on two things: his low levels of chakra and the fact that he had one arm to handle two ninja at once. His katana spun free of its sheath before either men could even react to their sudden collision, and Sasuke skewered them on his blade, penetrating one through the shoulder and the other through the bicep until they were pinned together against the elevated section of the roof. They cried out in unison, but their noises didn't echo beyond the very next crack of lightning that Sasuke generated somewhere in the distance, its very purpose to disguise their screams. Releasing the blade, Sasuke knelt before them in the pouring blackness, just so that they could see a glaring set of red and purple irises. He wouldn't waste his limited chakra combing through their deranged minds, so Sasuke planned to interrogate his preferred way and do it thoroughly. Where is she? We don't know who you're talking ab, came the automatic lie, and Sasuke twisted the blade immediately in disguised fury. He was not in the mood to listen to deceptions. The thunder boomed. Sasuke sighed. Sometimes it was the most predictable outcomes that tipped Sasuke over into an all-consuming sea of annoyance. If he treaded this sea too long, Sasuke would tire and eventually sink, and the Uchiha was already too well acquainted with the depths of anger. If he hit the bottom, people would begin to die. And Sasuke didn't want to be a murderer anymore if he could help it. Steadying himself, Sasuke pinched the bridge of his nose and said lowly, I would advise not bothering to waste my time with more lies. It won't end well for you. We don't know, spat the first man as he clutched at the katana penetrating through his arm. The light show is unnecessary. Someone needs to put you in your place, Uchiha, for using your power in this village. So that was it. As long as Sasuke was laying low, they were planning to leave him to his futile attempts to find Sakura. They didn't want the real authority alerted to his presence because then Sasuke would talk, explain his presence and involve the real people in charge of this village. That, or there was deal with the higher UPS. If the village leaders knew of this Organzaidan's activity, they had allowed it to transpire as long as it remained inconspicuous. All of this information told Sasuke that the less evident of a profile this organization could keep, the better. Sasuke suspected that Tanagakure didn't want multiple villages involved, but were somehow benefiting personally from this arrangement. Sasuke guessed that this secret organization also wanted to eliminate more reputable individuals off their list before they were confronted by multiple parties. It was a testament to their lack of experience and firepower if they had yet to eliminate number 1 and had already pissed off 2 out of the 5 cage. Last chance to be honest, Sasuke hissed, twisting the blade deeper into both of their bodies, relishing the squelch of the blade's movements in their flesh. We lost her. The man in the very back hissed, spitting out rainwater, holding his partner very still with his clenched fists to keep him from jostling the weapon any further. And many of our men, with her. Sasuke unfeelingly blinked at that confession. Shut your mouth, the front man said to the fellow soldier behind him, jostling the both of them as he tried to shift in order to look back at him. Stop moving, the man in the back hissed, grabbing more firmly to the man seated practically in his lap. They had already located and lost her. The mention of other members of their organization going missing was the part that had Sasuke's mind trying to make connections. Sasuke wasn't sure if this was a trap. He had expected it to be a lot more difficult to receive any answers from anyone. So, what was the angle? Did they intend to follow Sasuke to her after telling him that? There would be no chance of that happening, Sasuke would quickly ensure it. Inhaling, filling his lungs with electric energy, Sasuke reached forward and gripped the hilt of his katana. The current came from his lungs when he exhaled and it snaked around his arm in a circuiting slither, crisscrossing down the blade until a surge of electricity connected with their open wounds. Another crack of lightning, closer this time. More screaming. It had been a very long time since Sasuke had used this technique to simultaneously torture and weaken his captive. He remembered performing this very move on Yamato, the temporary squad leader for Team 7 when they had come searching for Sasuke in one of Orochimaru's underground hideouts. How ironic that he had once felt the same level of annoyance that he was now, but it had been directed at Team 7. And now, it was because these imbeciles had the absolute audacity to come after one of them, as if any member of Team 7 could be taken down by such dirt beneath their feet. As if Sasuke didn't have the absolute power to obliterate every single one of them without a second thought. Enough, Sasuke growled lowly, forcing himself to talk more than he was usually inclined to do. This current will intensify over the course of 2 minutes until you are essentially executed by electrocution. Which means you have 2 minutes to answer my questions without lying. If I even suspect a lie, lightning will travel straight to your heart before 2 minutes is even up. Their eyes widened, and Sasuke moved out of the path of the rain running down the slope of the roof towards him, until he was free of any electrified water that connected with their bodies. First question, Sasuke began, thickening the electricity traveling through his arm to his blade. Where was her last known location? The bathhouse, groaned the man in the back, the more talkative of the two. The brothel. Despite his usual collected countenance, Sasuke's red and purple eyes widened marginally at such a word. A brothel, a brothel. A new fire quickly formed in Sasuke's chest at the revelation, and it was not the lightning-style chakra centralized there. It was a fire of panic and rage. When? Sasuke asked next, amping up the voltage once more. The man in front, the first to receive electrical current, slumped forward unconscious. Earlier in the night, the guy mumbled, lips beginning to numb with the rest of his body. His words still came out in a rush, however, eager to meet Sasuke's deadline, before he, too, ended up like his partner. Our leaders failed to give us our next orders at our usual rendezvous point. We arrived at the bathhouse, their last known location, to investigate the other girls. They told us she had taken them. Where is this bathhouse? Came Sasuke's final question. Promise you will spare me, first, the man pleaded, but Sasuke's frustration only grew at the begging. Instead of assuring the man, Sasuke twisted his blade again. After the scream, came the answer to his question. On the east side, against the mountain. This man, too, fell unconscious, slumping against his partner, when Sasuke poured more electricity into his chest cavity. Sasuke ripped his blade free from their bodies. He left them there in the rain, feeling absolutely no guilt at all because they would at least eventually wake up. Unlike every man who had occupied Sakura's space in a godforsaken brothel, these two men were lucky because they would keep their lives. Thanks for watching.